Hello, I'm Kevin Masters, and this is my gasser project. We'll call it a 1933 Willys pickup. All steel, except for the fiberglass front end. Under construction. I'm running the stock 17-inch wheels. And of course, as I said, Griffin will always be photobombing anything that I do. Now, the front axle underneath the car is actually one of the axles that came from the attic of the original Mr. Gasket company that we purchased from Tommy Harupka, one of the Harupka brothers. They had purchased all of Ohio George's leftover Willys parts, and then they brought them back and stuck them in the attic of this building, and then they sold the business, and they just left them up over in the attic because that's where they were. Well, they ended up buying the business back years later, and all that Ohio George stuff was still up over the attic. No one had even really been in the building since they sold it. Now, so the front axle came out of those Ohio George spare parts. So did the lift blocks in the front. I haven't got around to asking George if he made them, but I'm kind of assuming so. The front springs are out of Selkirk and Bork's 35 Willys coupe when they were running it with the small block. Later they changed to a Hemi and changed all 4 leaf springs and the rear end, and Dad ended up with all those pieces. So I put him up underneath this car because this truck is built to carry history. So like the Ohio George parts, the Selkirk and Bork parts. Now that's a reproduction Hurst motor mount. The motor's kind of sitting in there at an angle because I haven't built the motor mount yet. That reproduction mount came from Speedway, and interestingly enough, none of the bolt holes lined up with the block. So we had to drill them all out to make the thing fit on the motor. That was the last thing that we did before the pandemic attacked us. Now, this piece is actually goes in the frame. Now I'll be cutting and modifying it and putting it back in the frame to use it to box it. The front axle, as you can see here, the bracket to hold the rear shackle is mounted underneath the frame. Stock, it actually ran through the hole directly above it and made the car sit another inch and a half lower. It has a little bit longer shackle on it, and by moving the shackle down below, you gain about 2 inches in height, which also causes along with the lift block, causes the axle to twist slightly back. Instead of being straight up and down, it's back a little bit. So that brings the caster on these is about 8.5, and at speed they were designed to run at, which is 35 to 45 mile an hour, they really didn't get any bump steer, and they drove decent for what they were. Now, this car would be designed to run 140 mile an hour, and at 8 or 8.5 degrees, when you got up to speed, this thing would have bump steer like crazy, try to shake you off the road. So by adding more caster, which this is about 12.5 degrees, you can actually run down the track, and if you have everything dialed in right for the car you're running, you can drive it with one hand because it literally goes straight. Now, the more caster you add, when you turn corners, the front end will actually flop, and to pull it back is really difficult because it's manual steering. But as long as you kind of keep it with little short turns, it doesn't make it so hard. But with this much caster and a locker rear end, pushing it around the shop is a giant pain in the butt. Now, as we look back, the best way to box one of these old Willys is on the frame is actually to take the X member out of the middle and slide it inside the frame rails and weld it in, which is what I've done there. Now, I've also built cross member pieces out of 2 sides of an X member This car actually cut up 3 X members to get all the pieces I need for the boxing. But so I welded 2 of them together and made a rectangular piece of tubing out of 2 pieces of C-channel. Now the lightning holes are factory, and I left those in there because they're cool. Now, rear end is an 8 3/4 Chrysler locker, 513 gear. The rear ladder bars, which are kind of hard to see from this angle, I'll get better angles on a different video, are off of Competition Engineering's Bad Jose. That was a National Record holder car. It was a Tri-5 Chevy. It's been restored back to original now. Got some old, I think those are Pro-Track tires on some Kragers in the back of it. That's the gas tank sitting there on the bed. And on the end there are rods. Those are from the last engine Ohio George camera motor, the Ohio George running the Malcolm gasser. I'm using those for stanchions for my fuel tank, which is a spare fuel tank that came with Virgil Cates' world champion 33 Willys. Now I built my own bed, reproduction bed, and then I built this 1x1 framework to hold the sheet metal. And that is going to do 2 things. It's actually going to stiffen up the whole rear of the frame very well. I still got to gusset it and final weld it up with the sheet metal. With the sheet metal's already done. It also will get boxed up over the rear axle. And I have those pieces made. I just don't have them here close. I don't plan on putting a modern roll cage in it, which is one of the reasons why the car will probably be crackle car only. Because I think that the bars through the back window and the cage really takes away from the nostalgia look of something like this. This car is actually made to save history. All the stuff on it, including the blower, the valve covers, all came off of other gassers. The blower and carbs there are off of Hauling Ass 57 Chevy. It now belongs to Matthew Nilsson, or Matt King, and it used to belong to Tom Nowicki. So that's going on to my motor. The motor's sitting there. It's a fresh blower motor rebuild. All old school, none of this new high-tech stuff. It's got a set of pretty heavy Chevrolet H-beam rods in it with the bow tie. A nodular steel marine crankshaft. Forged pistons. Doesn't have a cam in it yet, but I'll use just a pretty mild blower cam with almost 0 overlap so that it holds all that compression in the cylinders. But that kind of gives you the first idea of what I got going on with this. The front spring hangers are in the same place, but on a 33-34, they're flat with the front of the frame. And then with the 35-36, they actually stick out about 2 inches, because the fenders are about 2 inches longer on a 35 and 36 than they are on a 33-34. So I had to switch over those cast iron pieces to 33-34 style in order to get all the nose and everything to fit correctly. So that gets us started. This is my first video. It's really rough, but it's a start. Thanks.